All right, we're a little bit early, but that's normal. We are trying to use a new setup here. I am on an actual desktop computer, but it's old. So we don't know if this is going to work. So we're testing right now, and we're going to see what happens. This computer is kind of slow, and I'm looking at myself, and it kind of jerky. If you saw that earlier today we put up a live feed, that was during our church time this morning, and that was because we had some of our people were gone and they wanted to be a part of the lesson and so forth. Church time this morning. So that was because that's what we did. We had some of our people were gone and they wanted to. So it looks pretty good there. Church time this morning. So don't you think? That's what we did. And some of our we can do it this way.
Well, it lets you see the comments.
I can't see that far.
But it's not. The video's a little behind you, so it's going to throw you off.
So you guys have to type your comments ahead of when I'm going to see them. So type them before you think of them, and that'll work. Get that out of here. Move this a little bit closer. Until I have my eye surgery, I can't see that far. Yeah. All right, so move it about halfway, John. Right about here.
That puts you pretty close.
Yeah, well, if that scares them, they can run away. Or they can hold their phone or computer further back.
We'll try to see how it works.
Thank you, John. You know, I'm a software engineer, and he is my technician. Oh, I do know mainframe operating systems and stuff related to that. PCs, I've never taken the time to really learn. I call myself a power user, but not an expert. So, oh, is that appearing over there? Oh, okay. Well, I can do that. Kind of cool. I do love technology. So, yeah, the clock is right over there, so you've all probably figured that out from other videos. And no, we're not going to go outside anymore. This time of year, it's already getting pretty dark. And when the sun starts to go down, we're at 6,000 feet in what they call high desert. That means we have very little. Hi, Cindy. That means we have very little to retain heat around here, very little vegetation, as you can see when we did shoot off the deck. So the temperatures plummet when the sun goes down. So this time of year, going outside this time of night, it's fine if you dress for it, but the problem is there's no lights out there until some electrician comes and fixes our outside lights for us. And it does get chilly. So anyway, there's the explanation for what we're doing, why we're inside, and why we had Facebook Live on this morning. This morning's lesson was out of Genesis 14, and usually we do a discussion-based class, but today it was more me teaching, a few comments and questions. Inside is fine. Thanks, Mom. I don't think anyone's going to pick me up and move me outside anyway. This morning I talked about, mostly it was about Melchizedek. And I tried to take a story that most Christians have heard over and over, and I tried to bring some new concepts in there to teach us that we can learn more about the Bible than just what the exact Bible story says if we just use our noggins. So that was this morning's study. And speaking of using our noggins, tonight we're going to go into Romans chapter 12. A very, very loved chapter, especially because of the first two verses. I get it. I love them. But let's see if I can't maybe find something to help open your eyes a little bit and maybe help encourage you in your Christian walk. So don't miss the relationship of Romans 12, 1 and 2 with Romans 11 and the rest of Romans 12. This chapter starts with therefore. Romans 12, 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters. What's the therefore mean? It means, therefore, you better be looking back at Romans chapter 11. And in Romans chapter 11, he's talking about Gentiles and Jews. The Jews lose their salvation. The Gentiles are grafted in. No, the Jews didn't lose their salvation. And he finishes with, the NIV calls it the doxology. Pretty good title for it, frankly. I like it. It says, oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. I like that. With that in mind, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Oh my goodness. This is one of those verses that any preacher worth 2 cents can probably go for an hour on. It is magnificent. If anyone is a Christian, they are a new creation. Old things are gone and everything is new. Oh wait, that's in 2 Corinthians 5:17. But isn't that what he's talking about here? This same guy wrote them both. And he was in Corinth when he wrote Romans. So I'm sure he was remembering what he wrote to the Corinthians when he was in Corinth writing to the Romans. So these words aren't just for new Christians, people. Whether we're talking about 2 Corinthians 5:17 or Romans 12:1. This is not just for new Christians. It's something that I don't want to say older Christians, but people who have been in their faith longer. How's that? Because sometimes it's old people, sometimes it's young people. The age Paul's talking about here, if he were explaining this, is not about our chronological, physical age. It's about our spiritual age. New creation, a new creature. This is for all of us. And he's telling us that because we have received God's mercy, we should offer our bodies as living sacrifices. As living sacrifices. That is reasonable and proper, but what does that mean, living sacrifice? Well, in the Old Testament, a sacrifice was something that was killed, put on the altar, and burnt up as a sacrifice to God. We are killed, burnt up, and offered to God? Well, in a manner of speaking, if we are indeed a true Christian, a true believer. Our flesh is, Paul said in Philippians 1, he says, I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, but not I, but Christ in me. We have been sacrificed if we are a true believer. And do we think about this? That wasn't Philippians, that was Galatians. Oh, I'm getting old, I forget. That's in Galatians chapter 2. So is this what we're talking about, that we have been crucified? That we are 100% God's possession? Do we live like that? That's the question that we should be asking ourselves. Paul's known for saying, I am a slave. He says it a few times. But what does that mean? You know, a slave does not live for themselves. They don't usually have any personal property, or very little. They don't have free time. All their time belongs to their master. Everything they have belongs to their master. If they have personal possessions, it's because the master allows them to. And they aren't busy accumulating wealth for themselves. They're busy accumulating wealth for their master. They aren't busy taking care of their own personal needs. They're busy taking care of the personal needs of their master. That's what being a slave means. Do we live like that? Honestly, do we live like that? Let's read verse 1 again. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Verse 2 starts with, do not conform to the pattern of this world. What's the pattern of this world? What's the pattern of this world? Well, if you're an American, the American dream, they called it, at least when I was young, and still do to the best of my knowledge, and that's to what? Own a home. To own your own home. That was the American dream. Oftentimes, a dream before that is to get a nice car. Or when I was a 16-year-old, to get a car. I didn't care if it was nice. To get a car, and then to get a nicer car, and then to get a nicer car, and a nicer car, and a nicer car, until we are busy spending everything we can on getting a car. How do we buy a car? We go to the dealership, and we say, how much will you give me for my old one? How much per month for the new one? Will you finance me on that? Oh, you'll only finance me to, well, what can I get if I buy this much per month with my trade-in? And we take it to the limit. That's the pattern of this world. When we get past the point where buying a car is a difficult thing, what are we thinking about? Retirement. Got to save money. Got to have money when we retire. Got to have a lot of money. I want to be able to travel all over. If we're really doing well, I want to travel all over the world. If we're not doing so well, I want to travel around this part of the country. But we're thinking about our retirement. We might be thinking about our vacation. You know, Jen and I made pretty good money for part of our lives. And we didn't take a vacation every year. I know people that take vacations 2-3 times a year. There's a man that goes to a church real close to here, and he goes on a cruise 2 or 3 times a year, and often takes his children with him, and they're grown, and they have children. He takes the whole family. He's always talking about and focusing on his vacation. People, that's the pattern of this world. Our house, our car, our vacation, our retirement. A house. Isn't it silly? I got a friend that raised his 2 children, and they lived in a 1,100 square foot house. And after the second child went off to college, they built a 3,000 square foot house for just the 2 of them. Well, the kids are going to bring their grandkids home, and we want to have everyone stay here. Why? They're only going to use it a few days, maybe weeks out of the year. That's what motels are for. And besides, he doesn't have an indoor pool at his house. They do in motels if you don't go really cheap. What is the pattern of this world? What are our priorities? That's the real question. What are our priorities? I'm going to come back to this because he's going to get into it later in chapter 12. But he tells us that we need to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. What does that mean? What does it mean to be transformed by the renewing of your mind? The dictionary defines renew as to resume after an interruption, or reestablish a relationship, or repeat an action. So if we are new creations, how can we renew our minds? Perhaps Paul is referring to humanity. You know, humanity had a great relationship with God in the Garden of Eden. We left it behind. Humanity had a great relationship when Enoch walked with God, when Noah was told to build an ark. Humanity had a great relationship with God when Abraham, and we can go through the Bible, and there are many times we've had great relationships with God. Perhaps that's what he's talking about, is humanity, and we lose ourselves to renew our minds to get on this. Our relationship with God be our number one priority. And I've quoted it before. Jesus once said, if you don't hate your family, then you can't be my disciple. No, he didn't mean we're supposed to hate him. But in comparison to him, we're supposed to hate them. Why? Because he doesn't want to be second place. Now, that's what Paul's talking about here. All of this is talking about our focus, changing our focus. That's the new creation out of Corinthians. That's being crucified with Christ in Galatians. That's what Paul's talking about here in Romans. And he's been talking about it all the way through this. And he's been building up, and I keep saying that. He's been building up, and this is a culmination. And he builds up some more. And this, Romans 12, we're getting close to the end. So we can keep on with Romans 12, 1 and 2, but let's move on to verse 3. I'm going to read 3 through 8. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought. But rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of you has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your gift, with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Wow. There's another passage I could go on forever. But let's focus in on this. Do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought. And most Christians are going to say, well, I don't do that. I'm not sure that's true. We like to think it's true. And maybe for you and me it's true, but you know, not everyone's as good as you and me. In fact, maybe not everyone's as good as you. I'm not sure I'm that good. This is what Paul talks about in Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, where he says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others more highly or above yourselves, not looking at your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationship with one another, have the same mind as Jesus Christ. That's what Christianity should be all about. Love that puts the needs of others ahead of our own, because we, though many, form one body, and each member is different. Remember back in Romans 11, all the way to last week, when Paul said he took pride in his ministry? No one doubts that his pride was like that of a father who's proud of his children as they achieve great things. If people took Paul's teaching to heart, why, he saw the results in their lives, and his pride might come from their obedience to God. Here in verses 3 through 8, Paul mentions the gifts of the Spirit, and for all my Pentecostal friends, don't get too excited, because gifts of the Spirit does not always mean speaking in tongues and so forth, although it might. But what he's talking about is all the other gifts too. We should desire all of the gifts, and they aren't all about us. In fact, none of them are about us. The gifts are all about how we use them to serve others. And that's what Paul's talking about. It's for the benefit of others. That's what we need to focus on. We need to focus not on getting the gifts for us. We need to focus on getting the gifts so we can focus them on others. How do I know that? Well, I read ahead. In verses 9 through 13, Paul says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Be devoted to one another in love. Be devoted to one another in love. And that's not a glitch. I want to emphasize that. Did you hear it? Love must be sincere. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor. Serving the Lord, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Oh, practice hospitality. When the Bible speaks about love, it's not usually talking about sexual attraction. In 1 Corinthians 13, we see love spoken of greatly. Again, Paul. Here we see Paul focusing on the needs of others. Love. Hate evil. Do good. Love one another. Honor others. Be zealous and fervent. Serve the Lord. Be joyful. Be patient. Be faithful. Pray. Share. Be hospitable. Speaking of sermons, I can go off on another one here. Love must be sincere, people. The old adage I quote all too often, or maybe not often enough, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Love must be sincere. It's just after the list of the gifts, and it should remind us of 1 Corinthians 13, where we learn that it's the greatest of gifts. I really don't get excited about gifts of the Holy Spirit in somebody, in myself, until I know how the love is being applied to others. We need to love, not just with words. Saying, I love you, doesn't mean much if our actions don't match up. Same old example I've used many times. When a man is trying to win a woman to be his wife, and he says, I love you 653 times, doesn't mean a thing unless his actions show the same thing. And oh, by the way, that's the secret to a long marriage too. When two people love each other, it isn't about saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. It's about letting our actions show that we love. that's what we should do as Christians. Man, I can go over this so much, but I want to jump ahead. I want to consider the last two phrases of this paragraph. And one is share with the Lord's people who are in need. You ever wonder how God looks at us when we have people going to a church and we have extremely diverse lifestyles? In a great many churches, we have people attending who are perhaps haven't even eaten yet that day, or maybe for a couple of days. It happens, people, and it happens in some really nice churches. I'm not talking about churches that are in the worst section of town where you have a lot of homeless people. I'm talking about, the really nice church that's middle income or upper middle income. And yet sometimes there are people there that may look appropriate on the outside, but on the inside they might be starving. But they want to learn more about God. They want to serve God, so they come to church. Well, I don't know anybody like that in my church. Do you know everyone in your church? Are you looking for somebody like that? Or are you going to church and looking for your friends? That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. What are you looking for? We were talking in the beginning of this about cars. There's a man that I know, and he goes to a church real close by. It's one of my favorite churches in Cheyenne. And he's a church leader. I won't name his title or anything, but he makes pretty good money. And he buys himself a new car every other year. On the other year, he buys his wife a new car. And a few years ago, it's been a while, he went and bought matching sports cars with custom paint jobs. And he has a nice pickup. She has a nice minivan. They have two cars. They have a pickup. They have a minivan. They have two sports cars. He's got ATVs. He's got a boat. He's got an RV. There's nothing wrong with that. He's earned his money. He has the right. Am I right? But what if, instead of buying a new car for him every other year and a new car for his wife every other year, their minivan and pickup, they keep a few years. What if they kept their cars an extra year or two? And even if they just went down to the buy here, pay here place and bought a cheap car. We were at an auction yesterday. If I had a lot of money, I was tempted to buy about 10 cars, and then bring them home and give them away. And John's laughing because he knows it's true. Ruth was sitting next to me, and she was like, Dad, listen, we don't drive new cars. The newest car we have in this household with 4 adults here is a 2006. But we've given away cars, and I'm not saying this to boast people. I'm saying you can do it too. We don't have a lot of money. There's months where we're wondering where the money's coming from. If you don't trade in your car, but you keep it, you buy yourself a new one. If you can afford to buy a new car every 2, 3, 4 years, you probably could afford to keep your old one for a couple more years. Oh, but they got new things, and I want the new things. Get over it. Get over it. It's not about you.
Things I don't work anymore.
Yeah, yeah. But John said by the time we get the new things, they don't work anymore because they ain't so new anymore. Like this computer, it's a very beautiful all-in-one computer. It came with Windows 7. We bought it used, and yeah, it's old and slow. Yeah, it's the nicest computer I've ever had. Listen, people, you can give away a car. Most Christians can do that. Not all. This is what Paul's talking about. And share with the Lord's people who are in need. In America, it's hard to live without a car, but I know people that don't have a car, and they spend as much money taking the bus as some people spend on buying a used car. But if you got a little bit to put down, you can afford to get the payments, blah, blah, blah. This isn't right. He says, practice hospitality. Boy, hospitality, that's a word that most people that are younger generation, they don't even know what that word means. They think it means that they open their house for a nice party for all their friends. Well, if your kids have grown and left home, you got a spare bedroom, why don't you let people use it sometimes? If you got people at church that you don't know, and you can watch them and see what they drive away, why don't you invite some of those people that don't have that fancy new car? Why don't you invite them to come over to your house for Sunday dinner? Or at least take them out and you buy Sunday dinner. And don't go to McDonald's. At least make it at Denny's. Hello. Practice hospitality. This isn't the only book in the Bible that says that. John said it in his epistles. Jude said it in his epistle. These are the things we should be doing. There are people that struggle to pay for their travel. You know, we had a funeral for a local minister, and there were people coming from all over the country. Some of them, frankly, didn't have the money. What do we say? Well, we got a spare bedroom. We borrowed a mattress from some friends, and we put it in the office. And we got 4 sofas, and we got 5 recliners, and some of the sofas have recliners built in, and we got floor, and we got air mattresses. Am I boasting? No. I'm telling you people, you know, some of the sofas were given to us. We have all this stuff because we use it. We use it as part of our ministry. If you want to have fun, try doing what Janet did one time. I brought home 35 people from my motorcycle club, and we all spent the night in our house. And it wasn't this big house, it was a much smaller one. A little nicer, but smaller. Yeah, we had, you know, you had to wake 6 people up just to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. If you've never hosted someone in your house, I feel sorry for you. There's great joy in that. And, you know, if you're charging them, I feel sorry for you. I don't have much pity on you. I question if there's any hope for you. You don't get it. I shouldn't say that. That's rather harsh. If you think this is harsh, maybe you ought to stop listening. Stop reading the Bible. This is what Paul's saying. He says in verse 14, he says, bless those who persecute you. It's going to get worse, people. Think I was harsh? Paul says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Bless those who persecute you. Bless those. Are you serious, Paul? Bless those who persecute you? And remember, Paul, you know, in my mind, Paul's the guy that says, hey, there's a city over there where I haven't been stoned yet. Let's go over there. Oh, and after that, let's go to that one. I haven't been beaten or thrown in jail there yet. Paul looked forward to it. We don't face that. He was writing to the Christians in Rome. Now, they knew what persecution was. This is before the great persecution. but they were already being persecuted. And he's telling them, bless those who persecute you and do not curse. You know, one of the examples I've given many times over the years is when we're driving and someone cuts you off. You know, if you've got a 4-year-old, I want to ask them, what does Daddy say when somebody cuts him off and he's driving and he has to hit the brakes? You got a 4-year-old, you better be careful. Oh boy, somebody's pulling up. We got dogs barking. Listen, even if nobody's in the car, don't even think those bad thoughts. You need to think, what if something serious is happening in their lives? Maybe they didn't even realize they cut me off. Maybe they just heard something terrible about one of their loved ones getting cancer, dying. You know, maybe they're in a hurry because they're sick. Maybe we don't know. Bless people. Don't curse them just because they do something to irritate you. You think I'm carrying this maybe a little too far? Yeah, I get it. I'm a fanatic. I'm worse than a fanatic. I get it. But let's see what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, okay? And then I'm going to try and wrap this up. Hang in there with me. Luke chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus says, but to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give it to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. That's not just a golden rule, people. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Yeah, I get it. Read the verses that go with that. Luke chapter 6, start with verse 27. I challenge you to try and live by it. Maybe this computer's too slow. Listen, do this to those who are your enemies, those who attack you. Now that's what Paul's talking about. That's what Jesus was talking about. And just in case you don't get it, let's read on in Luke 6. We'll start with verse 32. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? This is Jesus talking, people. He says, even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. He is kind to everyone. He loves everyone. He offers everyone eternal life. Doesn't matter how good we are. He treats us all the same. We need to treat others the same way. Just because somebody's mean to us doesn't mean we should treat them in like kind. We need to treat everyone the same way, as if we love them and love them dearly. Oh, so if you thought Paul was extreme, you thought maybe I was extreme. Jesus, he's much more extreme on this. Love your enemies. He actually said we're supposed to give, to lend to people that we know aren't going to pay us back. Yeah. Try it. You'll like it. If you do it with a loving heart. It works. Romans 12:6 says, don't be conceited. I'm going way back here early in the lesson. This is a fatal flaw, especially in too many Americans, and even in Christians, even church leaders. You get together with a group of ministers, and oftentimes they start talking about how big their offering was, how big their church was, what the new building's going to look like, how many people are attending, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But it isn't the ministers alone. This is American Christians in general. You know, how many retreats did you go to this year? Well, I don't go to retreats. I go to advances, and I went to 7 of them. You have marriage problems. You ought to go to a marriage encounter retreat. I did. It worked for me. My wife loves me, and if she doesn't say that, I'll slap her. And I exaggerate, but not much. Paul's going to continue all of that in verse 17. He's going to say, do not repay anyone evil for good. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Some people it's hard to live at peace with, but you can try. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. That's quoting Jesus. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That passage is in Luke chapter 6, people, with the golden rule. Isn't that what Paul's been talking about here? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. End of lesson. You might guess I'm rather passionate about this chapter. I'd say it's one of my favorites, but I've already said that twice before. And it's right up there with Romans 6 and Romans 8. I get it. I think I like those two better, but it's real close. People, this is the heart of what Paul's teaching. In Romans 13, well, let's stay with this chapter for a moment. I want to ask you to think about this. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How does that dominate in the average Christian's life? I want you to consider it seriously. How does it dominate in your life? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Is that the thought that resonates in your head whenever you're dealing with people? Well, if I was that person, I would expect a Christian to do this. That's a pretty good thing. Wouldn't the world change drastically if just Christians lived that way? Have you ever dealt with a Christian business person that did not treat you fairly? Yeah, happens all the time, people. They put a little symbol of a fish on their Yellow Pages ad or on their newspaper ad on their store window, and you know, it's like the guy that put "honk if you love Jesus" on his bumper sticker. Somebody honked at him and he cursed him out. Happens, people. Okay, Romans 13 for next week. Love seems to be a theme that Paul has, not just here but elsewhere. I've talked about that. Love seems to tie Romans 13 to Romans 12. When you read Romans 13, consider Romans 12 and consider love and how it ties these two together. He says in Romans 13, he says, the hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber. What was he saying to the Christians in Rome when he said that? He talks in Romans 13 about earthly government and about how we should treat others. Think about how those are related. Why did Paul write those two back to back? And one last thought. We're nearing the end of Romans. If somebody's got a suggestion for what they want to do on a live feed after Romans, please let me know. Post it right there. It's a good place to do it. email me, call me, text me, whatever. God bless you. God bless you in accordance with your worship of Him. Amen.